everyone. Welcome to the first AMA series of 2021. Um, the Ask Me Anything series, which we call it AMA, brings together alumni and leaders in the community to help answer questions mostly related to students' jobs and careers. My name is Meghna Sabarwal. I'm a professor and program head in the Public and Nonprofit Management program in the School of Economic Political Policy Sciences here at UT Dallas. A few logistical notes before we start. You are all muted, so please feel free to use the chat function to post your questions, or you can even unmute yourself and ask a question yourself. If you do post a question in the chat, I'll be monitoring the chat and I'll make sure I ask our guests your questions. Now it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Christopher Bartels to the AMA series. Dr. Bartels received his PhD in public affairs from UTD in 2010. So he's an alumnus of the program. We're happy he's come back here. He's been working for the federal procurement for the last 11 years, and he currently serves as a warranted contracting officer for the Federal Aviation Administration. He also has taught, for those of you who may know, have taught contract management at UTD a couple summers ago. His research interests include economic development and public acquisition. Before we ask Dr. Bartels any questions, I want to mention this disclaimer, which is Dr. Bartels is speaking on his own behalf and not as a representative of the FAA or the federal government. Thank you again, Dr. Bartels, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure. Your students will post their questions, and as they post, let me start off by asking, tell us a little bit about contracting as a profession, and how did you get involved in the field and even working for the federal government?
Thank you. Appreciate the question. I was a student at UTD, and I did not know a lot about contracting, working on my PhD, and I had thoughts of maybe going to academia. I was in government administration, local administration. I worked at Council of Governments here over in Arlington before I came over to UTD, and had done a little bit of procurement work with them. Finishing up the PhD, I went to the government job fair. I believe you have that every March or so.
We still have it.
Okay, well, it was good for me in that I went around the career fair and put out my resume and didn't feel like I was quite finding my place. Next thing I know, I'm in a line, and I'm walking forward in this line, people in front of me and the people behind me, and it occurs to me I don't know where I'm going. And I said to the person next to me, I said, "What's this line for?" And he said, "Well, it's for the IRS." And okay, well, my first thought was, well, they want accountants or finance people. And I said, "Well, I'm in the line here. Just talk to the recruiter while I'm here." So I got up to the front and I said, "This is my background," and my background was actually it's something. My dissertation had something to do with taxation, measuring the performance analysis of tax increment financing districts in DFW, and that was enough of a link that they said, "Well, you could do contracting." So there's a resume, and then 2 months later, I got hired by the IRS to work in contracting. What is contracting exactly? It is basically people who are set apart to, I'm going to sound tongue-in-cheek when I say this, but to become professional shoppers in the sense that we have the legal authority to buy things for the organization, not necessarily a government agency or corporations also have them, nonprofit agencies, anything of a certain size or scale usually has somebody doing contract work. It's not really as well known as a lot of other things like accounting or HR or any of the other support functions. I'm not totally certain as to why that is, except that we seem to spend a lot of time writing contracts and not so much time marketing yourself. But it grew out of two places to where it is now. One in the private sector was the development from the 1950s of purchasing managers. So a lot of corporations have those now. In the public sector, it started modern procurement. Well, I mean, procurement has gone on since the beginning of time, but modern procurement really started around the World War II era and developed into more of a standalone profession during the 1980s, mostly in defense. And so certification, standardization, and education, what you have to do and so forth, became more standardized, more clarified since then. And now there are certain milestones you have to hit to actually work in this field, at least for the federal government. Now, state, local, all have their own different rules, but I'm speaking mostly from federal experience. That's what I've done. So from I finished my PhD in August 2010 and started the IRS the same month. Worked there for 7 years and then moved to the FAA. People ask me about taxes. I say, I can't tell you because I don't know anything about taxes. People ask me about airplanes. I said, I don't know about airplanes either, but I can tell you about contracts. Basically, I have a legal warrant, which is something like the way a military officer would have a commission. A commission is, and the legal distinction is a little hazy, but basically a commission is more encompassing. So like a military officer and a commissioned officer, I'm a warranted officer, and that I'm legally authorized to do a specific function rather than a general, like leading a military unit. My warrant is very specific to my agency and specific to a certain dollar threshold of what I can buy. So what I have the legal authority to buy from my agency. And why do we have that? Basically, it prevents a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse because you can't have everybody in an agency able to buy whatever they want because it just is chaotic. There are certain thresholds for smaller purchases. We call it micro purchase. Right now, in most agencies, it's about $10,000, where someone working in a specific part of that agency can just call it the equivalent of their credit card and buy something without a lot of bureaucracy in the way, at least how they perceive it. Much above that is where we step in, and people will say your program office needs whatever supply or service. They have to put in a requisition of what they want to buy, and then there's the parameters of how they want to buy it. And it's sometimes very simple, and sometimes the devil's in the details. And I'll get to that a little bit more. But basically, what I do is I write contracts. And so, as I say, I'm a shopper for the government, but I also manage the contracts from the beginning to the closeout and making sure that the agency is run, that the procurement need is met. So it's kind of a background function that may be part of why a lot of people don't know a lot about it as a career. But I will say it's been very good for me, and I've really enjoyed it. And so I'm on my 11th year now, and I look forward to continuing to grow in this profession. I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, no, that's fantastic background on what contracting is and what you do on your daily basis and what you could have done with your PhD. One thinks normally academia, and then here you are with federal government doing contracting. I did want to ask you real quick, because you said you're a warranted officer, contract officer, does that require a special training, certification? What does that mean? Okay.
Basically, the federal government has its own certification program, and there's a military side and there's a civilian side. It's kind of the same certification with two different names. I won't get too technical into it, but there's basically 3 tiers of classes that you take with so many years of experience, and the higher tiers allow you to have more authority and more signature authority. It parallels the amount of warrant authority that you're given. It's not an exact parallel, but so the federal government has its own certification system. Additionally, I have a certification called a CPCM, Certified Professional Contracting Manager, which is done through the NCMA, which is the National Contracting Management Association, which is kind of like our it's kind of like our professional organization. So I have that certification as well, which they say is kind of like a CPA for what we do. So basically, that gives me the letters behind my name to say I can do. So, yeah.
Sure, great. Again, a follow-up on that for some of our students who are here. We do have a class in the MPA program that you taught, and that's happening this semester too. Professor Pataglio is teaching project contract management. Just for those students who are interested in this, and what can you advise them in terms of, is there a certification that they can get right out of a master's degree or a bachelor's, and kind of prove that they are certified in this area and helps get a job?
Yes. Well, for the federal government, you need to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. In reality, there is a lot of competition, especially in the civil service. So a master's or PhD is definitely a plus. If you have veteran military experience or anything like that, or if you have prior government experience, also the good. I would recommend, if you're remotely interested in contracting at all, to take the course, even if it doesn't lead you in this path, that's fine. So it's discernment, it's learning what you want to do. As I told the students in the class, even if you never get directly involved in contracting and procurement at all, it's going to affect you directly, no matter what organization you work for. I believe UTD has its own procurement department as well. So if you need to buy something, if you need something, service created, there's probably a procedure in a larger organization, and eventually people like me will get involved. So it's good to be aware of the processes and how things go. Because sometimes people think, well, I go to Walmart and I buy my groceries and I'm done. So why can't I just do this with what I want to do here? And the larger the scale, then obviously the more difficult it's going to be. But what I do for the FAA specifically is building services, and that we buy the contracts to keep the buildings going, the maintenance. So things like air conditioning, HVAC, things like landscaping, janitorial work, pest control, snow removal. I do the Miami district, so we don't have a lot of snow there, but I get more landscaping. Different services are required just a building to function that you don't normally think about when everything works. But as we saw with the snowstorm, when everything doesn't work, I'm pretty aware of it pretty quick. So it's that's what I do. There's other sections of my office that do different things, like construction is a big section. We're just building and rebuilding different buildings. It's a whole different segment of work. There are other phases outside of FAA in different agencies. Of course, the biggest one is the Department of Defense. That's where most of the federal government's money goes to. So a lot of people get involved in this through the military or working for the DoD, and like weapons procurement. So it's a whole different ballgame, and I've not done that myself, so I can't speak intelligently on that. But the level of complexity and requirements for a non-commercial purchase is much different than a commercial purchase, and the public sector is much different than the private sector in terms of what's required and how contracts work.
Mm-hmm. Well, if people are joining us now, we are talking with Dr. Chris Bartels, who works for FAA, and he's a contract specialist and worked for federal government now 11 years. So if you have your question for Dr. Bartels, if you're interested to work for the federal government, please post your questions in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask yourself. So I'd like to ask you, how did UTD prepare you for this career?
That's a good question. It was very indirect, but it was very helpful in that I didn't know a lot about it until I got there. But the skills I learned in terms of time management, in terms of working with other people, and in terms of research and correcting your work and being very detail oriented. I'd say attention to detail is very key. So, and obviously you're a student, you've got to do that, and you've got to kind of discipline yourself. The main difference, the two main differences is that when you're a student, you can work all kinds of odd hours. You know, if you're a night owl or whatever, you can work whenever you need to work. But the government, it's different. You have to work during those hours. You have to get used to that. The other thing that was a little more challenging to me is when you're a student, you got your paper to write, your test to study for, whatever, and it's kind of on you. Maybe you have a group project, but it's mostly you. And with a contract, you're one link in the whole purchasing cycle. So you got to do your part, and then you've got to move it on to the next person or ask the next person for what you need from them. And sometimes that can be really frustrating when, I'm doing my stuff and I'm not waiting. I'm going to hurry up and I'm going to wait. And I don't think you get that as much as a student. So part of it is learning to realize you're a link in a team and you got to do your part. But you got to do what you can do, and then hopefully do the best to influence other people in the process. But in terms of how UTD prepared me, I'd say focusing on attention to detail, time management, and also relating to other people in terms of a contract is a relationship, purchasing relationship. And so working with professors and students and learning what works and what doesn't work. So these are all indirect skills, but they definitely help me do what I'm doing now. The actual technical skills of contracting were kind of learned in the classes that I learned when I started work there. But I'd say the bigger general skills I learned at UTD.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And, we teach our students to do team projects, do group work, because these are the skills that they will translate into work. Like you said, yes, you're working, but you're dependent on so many other people as for the job to be successful. So that's important. We have a question in the chat from Amatullah, and Amatullah asks, is the demand for contracting predominantly on the federal government level, or do state and city governments also use contracting?
That's a very good question. In terms of the actual number of people working, by far is the federal government. I believe it's something like 35,000 people do what I do for the federal government, entire world, because you have people all over the world at military bases and such that are overseas and such. But and also to answer your question, every state and every city, county, and regional governments have procurement people. I don't know offhand how many there are. I know something like 6,000 governments in the U.S. or something like that. I don't know the exact number, but just about all of them of any significant size have a procurement / contracting / acquisition person. The federal government's a little bit more structured in terms of the certification qualifications that may not translate directly to state or local government or to the private sector, but almost any organization has people doing what we do. So yes.
Great. No, you're right. There's the contract government is called shadow government. There are over a million, and that's why we, but it's over a million. If you don't realize that, that's the number of people working, especially defense contracts, as you can imagine. Like you said, we have Dave's hand is up. Dave, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, and then I have a chat question too.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bartels. Let me just say that, first of all, your class I took a year and a half ago, and I had just gotten a procurement job. And everything that you taught me in that class has certainly gone into practice.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
I work for the city of Dallas.
That's right. That's
right. And I got to ask that people are amazed that our procurement process for any given procurement can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And so I can certainly appreciate when you talk about attention to detail, that's why they call them specifications, and a time management, because there's so many moving parts and you're just a cog in that big wheel. trying to make it all work, and you're relying on so many other different moving parts. And so you have to be very considerate of time management, but also, I believe, very flexible and adaptable to the different
Yeah.
situations. I had no earthly idea. In procurement, there are acronyms: RFP, RFC, SP, RFQ, RFI. You just kind of, it makes your head spin.
Mhm.
But it
We have
takes
our own language, yes.
the 6 to 9 months to do a procurement. Is that the norm, pretty much in most procurement circles?
I'll give you the real vague answer. It depends. It depends on the size and the scope and exactly what you're buying and what you're intending to do with it. So it's kind of a broad question, but generally we would base the time frame on the size of the procurement. So just an example, like the FAA, if we were going to do like a 5-year contract that was more than $100,000, we can reasonably ask for 6 months. The time they say, here's what we want, the time we issue the contract. Normally I can do it quicker, but we need a little bit of buffer room because things happen, you know, and then people don't like it when they don't get what they want in a reasonable timely manner. So we try to give enough time ahead of time to make sure people are going to get what they want. So.
Absolutely. Okay. And again, I cannot say thank you enough. You let set some very solid foundation. I'm still at the city. Had become a senior buyer. So
Great.
I do.
Glad to hear that. Really glad to hear that.
Thank you. And I appreciate you answering my question.
Great.
That's fantastic, Dave. Congrats, and good to hear. The class was very helpful. I have another question on the chat from Brad. Brad asks, how has your PhD helped you in your current role and in your career advancement? Also, what drove you to get a PhD?
Good questions. How has it helped me? Well, first of all, it helped me get in the door because there were several dozen people applied for my position, including people who were CPAs. So a lot of high-level people had almost everybody had at least a master's degree, and the PhD is really what put me up in front of the other candidates. So that was one thing. So getting your foot in the door is helpful. How has it directly helped me with procurement? I would say it's been more indirect in that it's allowed me to kind of have the best of both worlds in that my full-time job is with the federal government, but I've also kept research and teaching on the side as I don't call it a hobby, but maybe it's the right word. And so I'm able to do that. And also I'm trying to do some research on contract management. There is a journal of contract management that I eventually would like to publish in. So that's a whole other field of research that is pretty specialized. And so there's a lot in PA overall that there's a lot of sub niches that we don't always hear about and such. So there's different, the PhD allows you to kind of walk into some of those places and gives it's kind of unique that a lot of people don't have a research degree doing what I do, but I think it gives me a little bit more perspective in doing what I'm doing. And also it also allows you to move up in different places. And I don't know where I'm going to end up in 10, 20 years, but I think it gives, the more you have, the better, I think. So.
That's interesting because I'm getting a lot of, our PhD students. Brad, who asked the question, is also a PhD candidate, which is why he was asking. And then Amanda, who's our current PhD student, was also curious to know, what will happen with a PhD. Next question is from Elizabeth Johnson, who asks, what skills or character traits have really helped you? I'm just giving that credit. Have really helped you or helps a person be successful in contracting?
Well, skills. Again, I would say time management, attention to detail, in terms of knowing what to do and when to do it and how much time to give to a certain task. So for me personally, this may not work for everybody, I have a running to-do list that it's probably 2, 3, sometimes 4 pages long in a Word document. and I start in the morning. Okay, I got to address this thing. All right, it's been addressed, or it needs to be pushed back. All right, well, I'll follow up in 2 days, 3 days, next week. Or, okay, it's done, cross it off. We like when we cross things off, but so that's just a system I've come up with for myself. Everybody does their own thing, but time management, I'd say attention to detail, learning the laws that pertain to what you're doing. I used to do IT procurement with the IRS, which is very different than building services. So the industries are very different. The way people interact are very different. And so learning the nuances of a different industry, it takes a little bit of time learning what the language they use. Everybody has their own acronyms. Like we said earlier, everybody has their own way of communicating. And then I would say also just learning, there's probably gonna be a handful of people that you interact with more than other people, like your immediate coworkers, your manager, your frequent customers, your frequent vendors. And you kind of get a sense of how they like to communicate. With some people are very much email, nothing else. Some people are all IM. Some people want to talk on the phone, and you kind of get a sense of how to reach them and how best to work with them. Additionally, contract management is management. It may not be HR management in terms of having people working below you, but you're definitely a manager of people in terms of the relationship you have between your customers, your vendors, and the people who use your services are not directly involved. So that you're learning a lot about relationships and people and people's nuances and what works and what does not work. So you learn management skills as you go, and just learning. It's a technical area, but you learn people skills by doing.
Thank you for that, Chris. You know, you said IRS hired you within 2 months, and I was a little like, wow, that was a quick time frame. Is that
Yeah.
okay? And so,
Okay, I'm sorry.
oh no, I was just saying, often when I teach HR and we talk about recruitment and government, the biggest issue students have is the time it takes.
Right.
And so then it's like, oh, I need a job immediately now because I have student debt to pay off, and
Right.
I can't wait the 4 to 5 months. And so, what do you have to say to that?
I was fortunate in that I fell into a time frame where the IRS was under a heavy recruitment period, so they were able to fast track me into a different position. They have since changed the recruitment process. I believe it's called gateways now. So if you're on this side, if you're looking at federal job, not necessarily in procurement, but anything with the federal government, USA Jobs is the main website for job postings and internships. And Gateways is the main program to hire students. There are other programs for veterans and other categories of persons, but mainly if you're a student, Gateways is the thing you need to look for. Unfortunately, I think the person asking the question is correct in that it's kind of reverted to the standard 5 months, actually definitely shorter than it used to be. It's close to a year. If you really want to work in the civil service, and I will say it's great. The pay and the benefits are great. The security is great. And you are doing something good for other people. You're serving, you're not to sound too bombastic, but I mean, you are serving your country and you are doing a good thing. So it is a good place to work. I definitely recommend it. In the 5-month interim, you can defer your loans for, I believe up to 6 months after you graduate. In between, you just do what you've been doing. How to get through school, take part-time jobs, and don't borrow too much, but borrow what you need to borrow, and just do the best you can. If you can, stick it out for a few months, and if you reasonably certain you're going to get hired, then I would say do it, because it is a good place to be.
That's fantastic. Yes, it's a great place to be. I have a more technical question from one of the students, a doctoral student, Ahmad Rafi. And Rafi asks, there's always pressure from private sector to outsource government functions, including some parts of contracting. How do the federal agencies fight this off? And basically said, thank you, this is very valuable talk.
Well, that's a really good question. And the answer is that different agencies address that issue differently. Again, I'm always speaking from my personal experience, but the IRS is a part of the the Treasury Workers Union, which is the second largest federal workers union. And they have basically agreed not to have third-party contractors at all. At least they hadn't at the point I had left there. I don't believe they do now. The FAA is run slightly differently. The laws are slightly different, and it's by intention, it's run slightly more like a business than a government agency. And as a result, they do allow third-party contractors. So right now, I have a third-party contractor working below me, and she helps me with some of the other the support functions. The main difference, and I'm only speaking from what I know, but this is a general across the board for the government, is that a third-party contractor legally cannot be a warranted contracting officer. They can be a contract specialist, which means you can do everything writing up to a certain point, but you don't have the signature authority for the contract itself. I have an example, and I'm going to sound probably too old saying this because I don't know how many students really understand. It's like the MASH episodes between Colonel Potter and Radar. I'm sure there's a more modern way to say that, but I can't think of it right at the moment. But basically, the third-party contractors are the doers, and then the contract officers would have the legal authority and the responsibility. So you have to make sure your people know what they're doing, and you don't want to sign up on something that's going to not be good. But that's mainly the two ways it's done. So it is a legal function that cannot be outsourced, but the lower level functions can be to a certain degree.
Great. Thank you for answering that. Another question in the chat from Amanda Rogers, another of our doctoral student, and she asks, what do you think is the best way to succeed in federal government? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, what are some ways to stand out in your first federal job, basically to succeed? You kind of break in, get that job.
Kind of a broad question, Barry. Succeed in the federal government and stand out. I'd say to succeed, you need to learn your job as quickly as you can, but learn that there are, especially in your first position, there are limits as to what you can and cannot do. And I think that's true any first job, any first career. I know a lot, I'll say myself as well. You want to just light the world on fire, and people look at you like, all right, you're new. You don't know what you're doing. You have to be patient and learn the job before you can take over the world. So there's that. So it's a matter of, if you're coming out of school and maybe you've been a really good student, maybe you've been an A student most of your life and you're an overachiever and you want to do great things, and that's great. But then you move into a large organization, and there's a bell curve in the organization, and most people are going to be at the middle. And if you're a person who wants to be on the right hand side, you've got to be patient, and you've got to learn how how your organization works, what the rhythm of work is. And that's, at least in contract, this takes about 2 or 3 years to really learn this. You got to go through several fiscal cycles to realize when things happen and when they don't happen. And sometimes, you want to be a superstar. Again, the transition from being a student to part of a chain is, you want to be a superstar. You want to get your stuff done. You want to, here I go, get my paper written. I'm doing a great job. If you don't moderate that into a large organization, then you're sticking out in not in a necessarily good way. You have to find your place within the organization. I know I'm speaking really kind of in vague terms, but every organization has its own rhythm. Every organization has its own structure. I mean, the UTD has its own structure, and as a student, you learn that first couple semesters. Any organization you go to, it's going to be a few months, at least 6 months, I'd say, before you learn how the rhythm of that organization works. And so part of it is learning to be patient and learning what you need to learn and when you need to learn it, and then saying, okay, well, this is the middle of the bell curve of what I'm expected to do. What can I do within that's a little bit more than what's expected of me? And that's how you stand out. Once you say, okay, I've done, to put it in letter terms, I've done my C work, but I want to get an A. So I want to do a little bit more than I can. And then if you do it in a timely manner with a lot of detail, without having to be corrected a lot, without having to be supervised directly a lot, you will stand out over time. People will be aware of your work. that's the best advice I think I can give there.
That's excellent advice. And Dave says so also in the chat. Excellent advice. When you keep emphasizing attention to detail, I'd probably say that if they have their resumes and if there are errors on it, and you're going in and submitting for a job to the government and they see errors, that in itself, I imagine, would be just you're out of the pile. So just speaking of that, can you say what can students be doing when they are, it's federal government is hard to break in. It's tough to get in. So what advice you may have for students? What should they be doing now to prepare for that job a year or so, or 6 months down the
I would say they need to be, or I would say, doing what you do for any job, for preparing your resume, your CV, for finding the highlights of what you can do as a student, what you are doing as a student that will most directly link with what you're trying to achieve. And there's going to be an unknown factor there, because I said, I didn't know I was going to end up here. I didn't know my dissertation on taxation was going to get me into procurement in the IRS. I had no idea. If you had asked me, I'd say I want to be a professor or I want to go back to local government administration. One of the other, that was my idea. If your thesis or dissertation is in a certain area, then target those agencies that do that kind of work. So I'm guessing if you're really looking public health research, you're probably not going to go after Department of Defense, but maybe there's a niche there. I don't know. But make sure you're kind of looking at the agencies that do things that are friendly to what your research is. And also be willing to relocate. Now, of course, with COVID, everything's changing, but there's still a fair degree of that. And a lot of at least the federal government jobs are really still centered around DC area, Arlington, Virginia, that whole area. So it's much more likely to make contacts and network in that region if you really want to work for the U.S. federal government. Again, if you want to work in the state of Texas, go to Austin or whatever, whatever the main center of what you're going to do is where you should focus your efforts. And again, there's logistical problems. So, how can you live there while you're trying to get a job? These things. It depends on the individual, but I would again try to network as best you can with the greatest concentration of people in the geographic area where they work.
That's great advice. Dr. Bartels, in hindsight, what do you wish you knew when you started the job search?
Started the job search.
As a student right after college, and you're thinking, I'm applying for jobs, and is there something you wish you knew or you did differently or you would have done differently?
I would have worried less and prepared more.
That's great advice.
And that I'm sure most of the students, that are good students are very diligent in their work and very conscientious and trying to get things done and trying to cross all your T's and dot all your I's and try to get everything in a row and try to, okay, if I take care of all my stuff, then I want good things to happen. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Sometimes no matter how hard you work, you're gonna hit a wall. It's gonna have to go somewhere else. Sometimes you just fall there. You just end up in the right place. So I guess the best thing to do is do what you can do, and then just let the rest go. Just do the best you can, and know that the best you can is all you can do.
That's true. Prepare more, worry less. I love that. And so just going back to some internship questions, can you talk about internship opportunities in the federal government for students?
Yes. As mentioned, that the Gateways program is the main internship means of hiring college students and recent graduates. It is the successor program to the way I was hired. A lot of things happened right after I was hired, so I was kind of grandfathered into a different program. Mm-hmm. So my best understanding is now, if you're not a veteran, you would go through the Gateways program, unless there are a few other programs that are not as well known, but mainly it's veterans preference. So if you are a veteran, definitely use that. If you're not a veteran, like I'm not a veteran, try to go through the Gateways program. And I don't believe the federal government has any unpaid internships, but if you can get a summer internship at any agency, even if it's not directly in the exact job you want, at least you'll have that experience. That is helpful. So there are a lot of federal agencies that will open BW. And if you're willing to go to a different city for a summer, for a few months, that's really good too. But they all are pretty highly competitive to get into.
Mm-hmm. What you do is very tedious, a lot of attention to detail required, as you were mentioning.
It can be.
What do you think is like the most enjoyable part of your job?
I think when everything's going well, you've got the contract in place and it's administered well, and your customers or people who are buying your service, who are utilizing whatever service, when they say thank you, everything's going great, and we really appreciate your help with this. That you just feel like you've done something good for people. I think that's probably a really good moment.
And you knew this was coming. What's the not so fun part of the job?
Well, I mean, dealing with people in any job, but sometimes people are not going to be pleased no matter what you do. And they don't understand, they either don't or don't want to understand the time frames it takes to do things, or the reasons why things are not going as quickly as they want them to go, which is why you have to be very diligent about documenting when things are done and how they're done. So if you have to go back and say, well, on this day we did this day we did this, and I've been asking you for this piece of paper for a month now, that's why we're holding up, you haven't given it to me. So you have to basically document a lot and say, oh, this is where we are, and just kind of be patient with people and realize that, especially now, everybody's stressed, everybody's nervous about different things, and you don't know where people, if they're having a bad day, you don't know why. But just realize if people are short, it's not usually because of you, it's usually because something going on in their life that maybe they're bringing in the office. I'd say it's probably true of any organization. It's usually not you, unless it's happening. A lot of people doing it to you all the time, then maybe you. But I mean, basically, if someone's having a bad day, you just kind of have to say, okay, well, that's where they are.
Mm-hmm. No, this was great. Yeah, mm-hmm. We have one more question. Let me see here. From Ahmad again, Rafi. How to fight off the unfair political pressures from executive branch or from legislators in contracting award process?
Okay. Well, the civil service, as you probably know, is designed to be politically neutral, and that we're not directly supporting one party or another. We're doing our jobs to make the agency run, to do whatever the structure function of the agency work for is supposed to do. So airplanes are supposed to fly whether there's a Democrat or Republican in the office or third party. It doesn't matter. We need the air traffic. We need people collecting taxes. We need people cleaning the streets. We need all the functions of government, regardless of who's writing the policy. In terms of, I don't know that the average contracting person has to deal with direct. I mean, maybe in the higher levels, probably higher than my ticket, but you may deal with political issues. But I would say that's almost at the cabinet level, that you would. The certain level of their appointees rather than civil service. So we do have a really good system in this country that makes it very clear what's the distinction between the two. A lot of countries don't do that, so that makes it more difficult. But the average, rank and file functions of government are designed to be politically neutral. Now, does that mean that there aren't political pressures at certain points for different things, like, for example, the wall, the Mexican border? That was, people were working on contracts in the customs office to build that wall, and now they're not. I mean, that's a big, high level, visible. But no matter what you feel about it, either way, you may be the person tasked to work on. If you're working that agency at that time, you may have to work on that. Maybe you don't agree with it personally. It's very unlikely that you're going to be in a situation like that. I've never been in a situation where I felt like I was personally compromised or anything. It's very rare. But there are ethical guidelines, like for conflict of interest and different things. Like if somebody worked for a company, then you can excuse yourself from working on that particular project in different situations. So I would say it's less likely to have political pressure, but it's much more likely that you might have a personal conflict of interest with a particular company, in which case you have to follow the applicable guidelines and kind of bow out. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was great. Love the wall example and how things can change with different presidencies and executive branch changes. So thank you for that. Amatullah asks, what are some of the skills, technical or otherwise, that agencies look for?
Okay, well, we already discussed a little bit of that, but I would say your educational background and your work background should indicate that you have, if not direct experience, at least an ability to do the work. So at least the federal government's requirements are actually fairly broad. They just want a bachelor's degree with like 24 hours in business, which really is very broad. And they're just wanting someone who looks like they can do at least the low end work. And the average college graduate with some business background should be able to do that. The higher levels have more requirements. There's different classes you have to take to get certified in different things. And so a lot of it is learning on the job as you go, and then getting particular certifications in your subspecialty. So there are at least 3 certifications I can think of for the federal general contract management. There are some others that I'm not as familiar with, but again, the more certificates and letters you can put behind your name, the more the better. Any kind of that must be for the government. Any kind of procurement experience or general admin experience you can apply that would have a parallel. Like when I was working for COG, I wasn't really working in procurement, but I had a couple of tasks to evaluate proposals. It wasn't a major part of my job at the time, but I was able to talk about that in the interview with the IRS and leverage that. It was maybe 5-10% of what I did, but that's what they were looking for. But I had a little bit of experience, so I embellished on that and said, this is what I've done. That helps. So if you're applying for a job that wants A, B, C, and D, and you've only done a little bit of D, well, talk about D, and say, this is what I can do. This is what I have done. And this is, then A, B, and C, I'm willing to learn that as much here, but I want to learn. It kind of had a positive attitude. I have some background. I want to learn more. I think most employers like that someone they don't expect everybody to be a superstar, but to know enough that you can do the job and enough that you can grow in the job.
That's excellent advice. Be willing to learn, be open to, show that attitude. I think that's going to go a long way in an interview. Excellent. We are coming to a close here, but I do want to ask you a couple last things, and then students feel free to post any last question. Is there anything we did not ask you that you would like to share?
Just like to say that I really do appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you all. I really enjoyed my time at UTD, and it really helped me find where I wanted to be and helped me grow a lot. And it's really, this is a really good program, and it may put you in places that you don't expect. It may put you in places that you don't even know much about right now as a student, but it will help you to grow and find different pathways. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Another question from Brad in the chat. Do you do research, style analysis, federal procurement contracts in your role? If so, can you please give us some examples you have experienced or seen others do at your job?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you do research, style analysis? So basically, do you do analysis, research? Do you use any statistical or any of those? And if you can think of examples,
sure. We are required to do market research for most commercial procurements. That is not nearly as involved as what you're probably doing at EG right now. For the really involved heavy statistical analysis type of contracts, those are more for research and development or larger scale weapons procurements and stuff like that. Most commercial off-the-shelf procurements are not going to require a lot of market research beyond getting quotes from different companies and that sort of thing. So you probably have a lot more research skill than may be required at least the basic level. But as you go on, there are places that your skills could fit better. So I mean, if your first job is you start to think, well, it's education, what am I doing? Know that you can grow into higher levels. So and that's true of anything. I mean, your first job out of school is probably not going to use all the skills you've learned in school because they want specific tasks completed. So it may not be your entry level job, but as you grow, you're going to be able to use those skills more often.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice, Chris. And the dean writes, thank you for that great program. Thank you for the frank advice. So yes, it is a wonderful program. We all are part of here. And Chris, you're a graduate of the program. So really appreciate that candid go on the program too. So thank you. Brad says very interesting perspectives. Thank you very much. My last question for you, and if there's anything comes up in chat, I will ask, but any final advice or insights for our students looking to work in the federal government?
I would say just keep at it. Keep applying. Every time a job comes open, keep applying. I would say network, find, if it's not procurement, but whatever your field that you want to go into, find people who work in that field, visit them, do the mock interviews, informational interviews, send out resumes, just do what the job office tells you to do in terms of doing that, and just go to professional networking events. And it's a little hard with COVID and all, but there's probably a professional networking organization for what you want to do locally in the area too. I mean, with contracting, there's one in Dallas, there's one in Fort Worth, and there's different ones for nonprofit and for private sector. There's a professional organization for just about any position, and you just gotta have to dig a little and find out where it is and what it meets, and just go to them and say hi. It's great because you're in a good position. Hi, I'm a student and I need help. And people like to help students because they know you don't have like this hidden agenda or anything. You're not going to try to sell them like I'm a student looking for a job. Can you help me? I'm trying. Can you? And most people, if you approach them the right way, most people want to help students, I think.
And that is fantastic. Yes, don't be afraid, ask, and especially if you're a student, people are willing to help. And do join professional organizations. Now we have a chapter on campus, ICMA, and it is for those interested in local government. So please be a part of that. And just like Dr. Bartels advised, be a part of any association that you think you want to down the road work for. So that's great advice. I cannot thank you enough, Chris. Just excellent tips from someone who's been working in the federal government for so long, who's a student of the program with a PhD, and you really threw some insight into just contract management too. I think students learned a lot that's another career that they can be thinking of, that oftentimes, like you said, there's so many contractors, but they don't do a good job marketing themselves. That's a whole area and a whole discipline to almost pursue. So again, thank you so much for being here, for your time. I know it's a busy time for you at FAA, but we again thank you for your participation. We thank all our students for this session. Thank you very much, and wish you all good luck in your jobs and job searches. So thank you. We're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat too.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take good care. Bye-bye.